January 15th, 1945. East Prussia. The snow falls in thick curtains across the Villachsky forest, muffling every sound except the methodical crunch of German boots advancing through the frozen underbrush. 200 meters away, partially concealed behind a shattered birch tree, a 20-year-old Russian sniper adjusts her scope with fingers so cold they've lost all feeling. Roza Shanina has been lying motionless in this position for 3 hours, her breath controlled to near imperceptibility, watching enemy officers organize an assault on Soviet positions. She is 5 feet 3 inches tall. She weighs barely 110 pounds. The rifle in her arms is nearly as long as she is tall. Through her scope, she can see a German lieutenant gesturing towards Soviet lines, his face animated with confidence. He has no idea that in the next 17 seconds, that confidence will cost him everything. What the Wehrmacht commanders don't know is that the small figure in the snow has already eliminated 59 confirmed enemy combatants in just 11 months of combat. That military historians will call her shots impossibly accurate. That her kill record includes a technique so rare, even veteran snipers consider it nearly mythical. She exhales slowly. The crosshairs settle. This is the story of Roza Shanina. Roza Georgievna Shanina was born on April 3, 1924, in the village of Yedma, in the Arkhangelsk region of northern Russia. It was a place so remote, so isolated, that the nearest school capable of providing secondary education lay 200 kilometers away. Her father, Yegor Mikhailovich Shanin, worked as a logger and collective farm chairman. Her mother, Anna Alexeyevna, raised 6 children in conditions of relentless poverty that defined rural Soviet life. 1920s, 1930s, 1900s. They lived in a traditional wooden izba, a single-room dwelling where all 8 people slept, and endured the brutal northern winters that could reach -40 degrees. There was no electricity, no running water. Education beyond the village's 4-year primary school seemed an impossible dream for a girl from such circumstances. Yet Roza possessed something her siblings didn't, an unshakable determination that her mother would later describe as frightening in its intensity. In 1938, at age 14, Roza made a decision that shocked her entire village. She announced she would walk to the nearest town with a secondary school to continue her education. Her parents forbade it. Village elders called it foolishness. Girls from Yedma didn't pursue education. They married young, worked the collective farms, raised children, and died in the same wooden houses where they were born. The idea that a peasant girl would walk 200 kilometers through wilderness and unknown territory seemed not just impractical but dangerous. The route passed through dense forests, where wolves hunted, through areas with no settlements for dozens of kilometers, through terrain that could kill the unprepared. Roza walked anyway. She left before dawn one morning in late summer with a small bundle of belongings, a bit of bread, and her mother's tearful blessing given in secret. The journey took her 6 days. She slept in hay barns when she could find them, in forest clearings when she couldn't. She walked until her shoes fell apart, then wrapped her feet in cloth and kept walking. When she arrived in the town of Arkhangelsk, her feet were bleeding, her dress was torn, and she weighed even less than when she'd started. She walked directly to the Pedagogical Institute and requested admission. The administrators initially refused. She had no documents, no money, no sponsors. She was a village girl with a primary education and bleeding feet. But Roza sat in the administrative office and refused to leave. She sat there for 7 hours, silent and immovable, until the exhausted director finally agreed to review her academic capabilities. She passed every examination they gave her. They admitted her on probationary status, and she excelled immediately. Mathematics, literature, history. She absorbed everything with desperate hunger. She worked multiple jobs to support herself. She cleaned classrooms, washed dishes in the student cafeteria, and tutored younger students. She slept 4 hours a night, and spent every other waking moment studying. Her teachers remembered her as brilliant but unsettling. She never smiled. She never socialized. She studied with an intensity that seemed to consume her entirely. One instructor later recalled, "It was as if she knew her time would be limited, as if she was racing against some invisible clock." By 1941, Roza Shanina had achieved what seemed impossible for a girl from Yedma. She was enrolled in university, training to become a teacher, fluent in multiple subjects. She had walked 200 kilometers to claim an education that society insisted she didn't deserve. She had proven that determination could overcome circumstances that crushed others. But the clock she was racing against was running out. War was coming. 1941, when Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, Roza Shanina was 17 years old and studying at a pedagogical college in Arkhangelsk. The news came through official channels, then through whispered conversations, then through the terrible silence of letters that stopped arriving. By autumn 1941, 3 of her 4 brothers had been mobilized to the front. Mikhail, Sergei, and Fyodor Shanin joined millions of Soviet men thrown against the German war machine in those catastrophic early months, when entire armies were encircled and destroyed. Then came the letter that would change everything. In 1942, official notification arrived that her eldest brother, Mikhail, had been killed in action during the defense of the Brest fortress in the war's opening days. He was 23 years old. The family had not even known he was dead for over a year. Rosa's reaction was not grief alone. It was something far more dangerous, a crystallization of purpose so absolute that everyone who knew her recognized the transformation immediately. Mikhail had been more than her brother. He had been her protector, her advocate, the only family member who truly understood her hunger for education. When she had announced her intention to walk 200 kilometers to school, he had been the one to defend her decision to their father. When she struggled with money, he sent what little he could spare from his military wages. He wrote her letters filled with encouragement, telling her that education was worth any sacrifice, that she was proving something important not just for herself but for all the girls trapped in villages like Yedma. His letters stopped in July 1941. The family hoped. They told themselves that communication lines were disrupted, that mail wasn't getting through, that silence meant nothing. For 13 months they hoped. Then came the official notification, sterile and bureaucratic. Killed in action. Brest Fortress. The 23rd of June 1941. The Brest Fortress defense had been one of the war's first and most brutal engagements. Surrounded and vastly outnumbered, Soviet forces had held the fortress for weeks, against overwhelming German assault. Most defenders were killed. Those who survived were captured. Mikhail had been among the dead, killed in the opening artillery bombardment. He had died while Rosa was still attending classes, still studying, still believing he would come home. The guilt was crushing. She had been safe in Arkhangelsk, concerned with examinations and grades, while her brother was being torn apart by German artillery. The injustice of it consumed her. Rosa immediately volunteered for military service. She was rejected. She was 18, female, and considered far more valuable as a future teacher than as a soldier. Soviet authorities in 1942 were not yet desperate enough to accept teenage girls into combat roles. She volunteered again in 1943. Rejected again. She wrote letters to military recruitment offices across the region. She appeared in person at conscription centers. She was told repeatedly that women were needed in factories, in hospitals, as nurses and support personnel. Not as combat soldiers. Never as combat soldiers. But the war was changing. German forces had reached Stalingrad. Leningrad was under siege. Soviet casualties were approaching numbers that seemed incomprehensible. Millions dead, millions more wounded or captured. The Red Army was running out of men. In May 1943, The Central Women's Sniper Training School was established in Podolsk. Women would be trained as military snipers and deployed to front-line combat units. When Roza learned of this, she volunteered immediately. This time, her application was accepted. She was 19 years old. She left for training in December 1943, 2 years after Mikhail's death. In her diary, she wrote a single line: "I will make them pay for what they took from us." She never specified who them were, the Germans, or fate itself. Outside Moscow was established in May 1943 inches, response to a desperate reality. The Soviet Union was losing men faster than it could replace them, and traditional gender barriers were collapsing under the weight of existential necessity. When Roza Shanina arrived in December 1943, she entered a world that seemed impossible. Hundreds of young women, many still teenagers, learning the precise mathematics of long-range killing. The training was ruthlessly comprehensive. Students learned ballistics, wind calculation, range estimation, camouflage construction, and field craft. They studied German uniforms and insignia to identify high-value targets. They learned to control their breathing, to slow their heartbeat, to remain motionless for hours in sub-zero temperatures. The instructors were combat veterans, men who had survived Stalingrad and Moscow, and they showed no mercy to their female students. Roza excelled immediately. Her instructors noted in her file that she possessed exceptional visual acuity, extraordinary patience, and complete emotional control under pressure. The Mosin Nagant rifle she was issued weighed 4 kilograms, unloaded, nearly 9 pounds. With the PE-4 power scope attached, it was longer than she was tall. The bolt action required significant strength to operate smoothly. The recoil could bruise inexperienced shoulders badly enough to prevent shooting for days. Many of the younger women struggled with the physical demands. Roza adapted within a week. She had spent her childhood helping her father with logging work, carrying loads that seemed impossible for someone her size. Her hands, small but extraordinarily strong, worked the bolt action with mechanical efficiency. Her instructors watched her transform from student to weapon with something approaching awe. The training regimen was designed to break students psychologically before building them back as snipers. They spent hours lying motionless in snow, in mud, in positions of such discomfort that weaker students quit rather than endure. Another day, they were taught that sniping wasn't about bravery or aggression. It was about patience, calculation, and the ability to watch another human being through a scope for hours before deciding the exact moment to end their life. It required emotional detachment that contradicted everything young women had been socialized to feel. Empathy, compassion, nurturing instincts had to be suppressed. Not eliminated, the instructors emphasized. Suppressed. A sniper who felt nothing was dangerous to everyone. A sniper who felt everything but could still take the shot was effective. Roza's psychological evaluations revealed something her instructors found both impressive and concerning. She scored exceptionally high on measures of focus and determination. She scored unusually low on fear response. When asked during evaluation interviews about taking human life, her answers were direct and unsettling. "They killed my brother," she said. "I will kill them." There was no bravado in her voice, no emotion at all, just simple statement of fact. One instructor wrote in her file, "This student will either become one of our most effective snipers or will not survive her first month of combat." There is no middle ground with Shanina. The curriculum included unexpected elements. Poetry and literature classes designed to maintain the women's humanity. Political education emphasizing the righteousness of Soviet defense. Medical training for treating wounds in the field. The instructors understood they were creating weapons, but weapons that would need to function as human beings after the war ended. If they survived, graduation rates from the school were high. Survival rates of graduates in combat were far lower. Of the 1,300 women trained as snipers during the war, Fewer than 500 would survive to see victory. Roza Shanina graduated in April 1944 with exceptional marks. Her final evaluation stated, "Possesses all technical skills required for effective sniper operations. Demonstrates unusual capacity for sustained focus. Recommended for immediate frontline deployment." She was 19 years old. She had 4 months of training. She was about to enter a war that had already killed 20 million Soviet citizens. In April 1944, Roza Shanina was deployed to the 184th Rifle Division as part of the First Belarusian Front, participating in Operation Bagration, the massive Soviet offensive that would ultimately destroy German Army Group Center. It was during the fighting near Vitebsk that she accomplished something that would make her legendary among Soviet snipers: a confirmed double kill with 2 shots fired in rapid succession, each bullet striking a different target. The technical term is doublet, or double through the scope, and it represents one of the most difficult achievements in military marksmanship. The scenario requires identifying 2 targets in close proximity, eliminating the first before the second can react, and firing the second shot before the sound of the first shot reveals the sniper's position. The time window is approximately 3 to 4 seconds. Most snipers never attempt it. The risk of exposure is too great. Roza achieved it 3 times in documented combat situations. Her combat diary, which she maintained throughout her service, records the emotional toll of each kill with devastating honesty. Her first confirmed doublet occurred on June 6, 1944, the same day Allied forces landed at Normandy, though Roza wouldn't learn of that event for weeks. She had been positioned in the ruins of a farmhouse outside Vitebsk for 11 hours, watching German positions through her scope. 2 Wehrmacht officers emerged from a command bunker approximately 380 meters from her position. They stood close together, consulting a map spread across the hood of a vehicle. Standard sniper doctrine would dictate choosing the higher-ranking target, taking the shot, and immediately relocating. The sound of gunfire would reveal her position within seconds. Any attempt at a second shot would be suicidal. Roza watched them through her scope. She calculated distances, wind speed, the slight elevation difference. She controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate. The first officer, a captain based on his insignia, pointed at something on the map. The second, a lieutenant, leaned closer to look. They were less than a meter apart. She exhaled. Fired. The Mosin Nagant's report shattered the afternoon silence. Through the scope, she watched the captain collapse. The lieutenant froze for perhaps 1 second, his brain struggling to process what had happened. She had already worked the bolt, already acquired the second target, already compensated for the tiny shift in her rifle's position from the first shot's recoil. She fired again. The lieutenant fell before the sound of the first shot had finished echoing across the battlefield. Her spotter, a veteran sergeant named Kalinin, stared at her in disbelief. "Did you just?" he began, but Roza was already packing her rifle, preparing to relocate. German return fire would arrive within 30 seconds. They moved in silence, crawling through rubble to a secondary position 150 meters away. Only when they were safely concealed did Kalinin speak again. "I've been spotting for snipers since Stalingrad," he said. "I've never seen anyone attempt that, let alone succeed." Roza's response, recorded in her diary that evening, was characteristically blunt. They were right there. Both of them. It would have been wasteful not to try. The doublet technique would become her signature. She achieved it twice more during the summer offensive, each time under circumstances that veteran snipers considered near impossible. Her kill count climbed rapidly. 15 confirmed by the end of June, 23 by July, 37 by August. Soviet propaganda officials took notice. Here was something valuable. A young, photogenic female sniper achieving extraordinary results. They began featuring her in newspapers and radio broadcasts. They called her the unseen terror of East Prussia. They printed stories emphasizing her femininity alongside her lethality, creating a narrative that served multiple propaganda purposes. But the attention came with a cost. Roza's commanders began restricting her operations, concerned that losing such a valuable propaganda asset would be politically damaging. She wrote in her diary with barely contained fury, "They want me alive for photographs, not effective in combat. I didn't walk 200 kilometers to become a poster." Throughout her military service, Roza Shanina kept a detailed personal diary, writing entries whenever circumstances allowed, recording not just tactical information but her emotional and psychological state. Soviet authorities would later attempt to suppress portions of this diary because it contained something dangerous. Truth. She wrote about the fear before combat, the crushing weight of taking human life, the deaths of friends, and her growing disillusionment with how the Soviet propaganda machine portrayed the war. In one entry from autumn 1944, she wrote, "I wish this would all be over. I'm tired of killing." In another, "They write about us in the newspapers as if we're heroes. They don't write about the nightmares." She documented the casual cruelty of military bureaucracy, the incompetence of certain commanders, and her fury when her requests for more dangerous forward positions were repeatedly denied because propaganda officials considered her too valuable to risk. The diary revealed something Soviet authorities found uncomfortable, that even the most successful soldiers could question the righteousness of their cause, that heroism and trauma were inseparable, and that the young woman they were celebrating as a propaganda icon was far more complex and troubled than the image they had constructed. The entries from late 1944 grew increasingly dark. By October, Roza had 54 confirmed kills. She was 20 years old. Soviet newspapers published stories about her with titles like Beauty and the Beast and The Girl Who Hunts Fascists. They printed photographs of her smiling, looking impossibly young in her uniform. They described her as cheerful, patriotic, and proud. The diary told a different story. "I can't sleep anymore without seeing their faces," she wrote on October 17th. "Every single one. I remember exactly how they looked through the scope in the moment before. Some of them were so young. Younger than me, maybe. What were their names? Did they have sisters? Did someone walk 200 kilometers for them too?" She wrote about her fellow snipers who didn't survive. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the most famous Soviet female sniper, had been pulled from combat after 309 confirmed kills and sent on propaganda tours. She had survived. Others weren't so fortunate. Roza documented the death of her friend Nina, another sniper, killed by German artillery. She described finding Nina's body, the careful way they wrapped her in canvas, the mechanical process of reporting another casualty. "We buried her near a birch tree," Roza wrote. "She always said she loved birch trees. I hope that matters somehow." In December 1944, Roza's requests for frontline deployment were repeatedly denied. She was ordered to remain in rear positions for propaganda purposes. She would be photographed, interviewed, featured in newsreels. She would be safe. She would be preserved as a symbol. She was furious. She wrote a formal complaint to her division commander, arguing that keeping experienced snipers out of combat for publicity purposes was a betrayal of military necessity. The complaint was ignored. She wrote another to the political directorate of the Red Army. That one was returned with a notation that she should focus on her duties as assigned. On January 12, 1945, she wrote, "They've finally approved my request. I'm being sent forward with the East Prussian offensive. Everyone thinks I'm happy about this. I am, and I'm terrified. I've spent 3 months being safe while others died. Now I'm going back to the place where every morning might be the last. But at least I'll be doing what I trained for. At least I won't be smiling for cameras while the war continues without me." The East Prussian offensive began on January 13, 1945. Roza Shanina was assigned to the 184th Rifle Division, advancing toward the town of Rykau in modern-day Kaliningrad Oblast. The fighting was brutal, close-quarters urban combat where sniper advantages disappeared. On January 27, her unit came under heavy German artillery fire. Roza was struck by shell fragments while attempting to shield a wounded artillery officer. The wounds were catastrophic. She was evacuated to a field hospital but died the following day. She was 20 years old. Her final diary entry, written the night before she was wounded, read, "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of dying for nothing." Soviet authorities censored her diary heavily before allowing limited publication in 1965, 20 years after her death. They removed entries criticizing military leadership, passages expressing doubt about the war's purpose, and sections revealing her psychological trauma. They preserved only the portions that supported the official narrative. Brave Soviet girl defending motherland. The complete diary wasn't published until after the Soviet Union's collapse. When people finally read her unfiltered words, they encountered someone far more human and heartbreaking than the propaganda icon they had been shown. A young woman who killed 59 confirmed enemy combatants, who mastered one of warfare's most difficult techniques, who walked 200 kilometers for education and traveled thousands more to avenge her brother, who questioned everything, who endured nightmares, who died trying to save someone else. The diary they tried to suppress revealed the truth they wanted hidden. That heroism and trauma are inseparable, that the cost of war is paid in nightmares by those who survive and in silence by those who don't.